When people new to vintage audio repair ask for help, the advice that they get is usually pretty predictable. Clean all of the controls, and if that doesn't work, recap it. Capacitor replacement is definitely important, but if you're looking to make your unit reliable for the long term, there's a lot of other items that should be much higher on your priority list. I'm going to cover 3 of those today. We're going to be using this board that I pulled from a Sansui G-22000 receiver that I'm working on as a case study for this topic. Now, on an initial look, you might be thinking, Ben, you need to replace all of these electrolytic capacitors at this age. And although that's true, there are 3 other issues on this board that are more likely to cause failures before any of those capacitors start to degrade. In fact, I'm willing to bet that there's not a single bad electrolytic capacitor on this board. And if you stick around to the end of the video, you'll find out if I'm right. The first issue is corrosive glue. A lot of times when people find this brownish colored material on a circuit board, they mistake it for a physically leaking electrolytic capacitor, but that's not the case. This is glue that's used during the production process to hold heavy parts down to the board. The glue itself isn't an indication of any sort of failure. Where the problem comes in is when this glue is applied too aggressively and it ends up extending onto the leads of adjacent components. Any leads that come in contact with this type of glue are at risk of failure. When this glue was applied back in the 1970s and 80s, it wasn't problematic. But with the passage of time and environmental factors like heat and moisture, some of these adhesives become corrosive and start attacking copper component leads and circuit board traces. So if we do have a component that's affected by this glue, what is the solution? Well, when we're doing a full restoration on something like this, we're going to be replacing the electrolytic capacitors anyways. So as part of the process, it's a really good idea to remove all of the corrosive glue and replace any of the components that have been in contact with it. Since I'm already planning on fully rebuilding this board as part of this project, let's pull this capacitor and use this area as an example. I start out by removing all of the solder and then making sure that the pins are free. I'm about to use the capacitor itself as leverage to pop the glue on the other side of the board, and if it's not fully desoldered here, it has the potential to lift a trace. There we go. Any wagers as to whether or not this capacitor is bad? Looks fine to me. With the glued down capacitor out of the board, I can clearly see where the glue is reaching. I'm going to suspect this jumper, these 2 resistors, this capacitor, and this capacitor. So I'm going to get at least the affected leg removed on all of these parts to give me some room to get this glue removed. I've removed this capacitor and lifted all of the affected leads, so now we have a clear outline of the affected area. Now there's multiple ways to get this glue removed. I'm just going to demonstrate the method that I tend to use on Sansui. If there's other processes or chemicals that you guys prefer, definitely leave that down in the comments. I used to use thin flathead screwdrivers and various different blades for removing this glue, but I was not pleased with the damage that it caused to the board in some cases. And a friend of mine had 3D printed me some plastic scrapers, and these were a game changer. They worked so well, but as you can see, they get worn out pretty quick. So I went with something else. We're going to be trying this as an experiment. These are some ABS scrapers that I got on Amazon. Looks like they have a nice, wide, very sharp edge, and then the other side is this smaller blade that should give a little bit more control. So I'm excited to try these out and see if they work. The glue that Sansui used seems to be pretty easy to get off if you apply a little bit of heat and use a nice firm scraper. So right now I'm just using my hot air tool to go around the area and just heat up the glue so that it becomes a little bit less rigid. Let's start there and see where we're at. So far this scraper is working great, and you see how we're not causing damage to the board. The silk screen is still maintained. So I'm just going to go around and slowly heat this area and scrape this until all this is gone. Once the majority of the glue has been scraped away, I like to come back with a cotton swab and some isopropyl alcohol and go over the area. This helps loosen up any remaining glue and clean off the board. So a combination in this case of heat, solvents, and brute force will get this glue removed. And you want to get as much of it off the board as possible. I've also heard of some people having success using freeze spray, which kind of helps turn certain glues into something that just crumbles and shatters. So there's all kinds of different ways to do this, and it really just depends on the manufacturer. I find the glue on Pioneer and Sansui pretty easy to remove with this method. If you look closely at this hole, you can see a little bit of glue kind of floating around inside of it. I'm just going to take this toothpick with a little bit of alcohol on the tip and try to clean that hole out. Let's remove some of these affected components and take a closer look. Now this one doesn't seem to be particularly bad. We can see the glue residue here, but we're not seeing any sort of green tarnish or major degradation of the copper. But from past experience, I know that this can become an issue in the future, so I'm going to go ahead and replace this entire part just to be safe. Now that the new capacitors are installed, do we need to replace the glue? And the answer is no. The glue was either there for assistance with the wave soldering process. We've soldered this in already by hand. It's completely fine. Other people speculate that it might have been for vibration during international shipping. And if that's the case, we're dealing with a much smaller, lighter part, and these devices are going to have a much easier life than they did back in the 70s and 80s. The good news with corrosive glue is at least it's easy to spot and address as needed. This next issue is a little bit more elusive, but there are still some visual clues. I'm talking about fusible resistors. Fusible resistors were designed to act like regular resistors in normal operation, but if heavy current was being drawn in the associated circuit, they were supposed to open up just like a fuse. The problem is, over time, with moderate current exposure, they would tend to drift terribly. And if they drift far enough out of specification, they can cause all kinds of downstream issues. These resistors usually have a light gray body and a slightly different shape. And when they've been exposed to moderate current levels, they change in color a little bit, almost like a yellowish color. So they are pretty easy to identify by eye compared to other resistors that might look similar. Here's an example of a couple of resistors on the same board that are kind of the same color, but look at the difference in shape and there's no yellowing in the middle. These are not fusible resistors. Fusible resistors will often have a special designation in the service manual. In the case of this G-22000, they're called out as FR. In other devices, there might be a special symbol next to them indicating that they're a fusible type part. These are prominent in Sansui, but you can also find them in Yamaha, Kenwood, Sony. They're kind of all over the place in this era. For me, fusible resistors are a replace on-site part. I don't bother trying to find a new fusible resistor style. I just typically replace them with the same value metal film. What's interesting on the board that we're working on is this fusible resistor has apparently failed, and a previous technician has paralleled in another part to restore the function of this circuit. So let's investigate this and see what's happened to this fusible resistor. This resistor is supposed to be 4.7 ohms. Place your bets now. Drifted high, drifted low, or open. Looks like this one actually acted as a fuse. Let's see if this is replaced with the correct part. Yep, it looks like a 4.7 ohm resistor. So whoever was in here in the past correctly identified that this fusible resistor opened up, and they just paralleled another one on top of it to restore the function of the circuit. Now, finding a fusible resistor that's actually served its purpose and opened up like a fuse is a rarity. It almost never happens. The more common failure mode is drift. So let's see how these other two fusible resistors on the board held up. These are called out in the schematic as 47 ohms. Let's see where we're at. Oh boy, almost double. And how about the other one? Not looking too hot. Let's get these replaced. I'll do 1/4 watt for the 4.7 and 1/2 watt for the 47. With the drifted and open fusible resistors replaced, we can move on to item number 3. If you've ever had one channel of your vintage receiver or amplifier randomly cut out, only to have it come back when you boost the volume, give the unit a tap, or cycle the power, there's a pretty good chance you already know what we're about to discuss next. And speaking of linking symptoms with root causes, that's one of my primary focuses over on Patreon. Anyone can learn to replace components, but the real challenge, and the part I enjoy the most actually, is figuring out why these devices fail in the first place. So if you're interested in sharpening your diagnostic skills and learning by watching over my shoulder with real-world service and restoration projects, head down to the description to learn more. Now let's jump back into issue number 3. You guessed it, relays. A relay is basically a switch, but instead of controlling it manually, it's operated electronically. These are most commonly found in the speaker protection circuits in vintage receivers and amplifiers. That's that little click that you hear shortly after you power on your unit. Now think back to a time when you were able to resolve a channel dropout just by manipulating or cleaning a stubborn front panel control. The same goes for relays. We're dealing with metal on metal contacts directly in the signal path that can become oxidized. In some cases, we can take apart and clean the relay contacts, but it's my preference to completely replace the relay if the proper form is still readily available. That's because relays often become pitted from arcing, which degrades the contact surfaces and leads to all kinds of intermittency. The relays in this G-22000 board have been in service for well over 40 years. Let's crack these open and see what the contacts look like. I have two digital multimeters connected measuring ohms across the two poles of this relay. If everything is healthy, these should be close to 0 ohms when the relay closes. You see how they're kind of jumping all over the place? This is at about 8K, 17K. Let's disengage and re-engage. Now this is down to 10 ohms. And 97 ohms, it's kind of just all over the place. This is a sign that these contacts are really worn out. Let's see if the second relay is any better. Yeah, that's not looking too good. And how about a brand new relay for reference? You see that? Close to a short on both meters. So what's causing those readings to be so terrible? Let's find out. These contacts actually don't look that bad. The ones on this side have a little bit of pitting, but these ones look pretty good. Let's clean these up and see if we can restore the function of this relay. Starting with some Deoxit D100L. I'm going to just get some contact cleaner on these contacts and just kind of polish it with a cotton swab. This is just to start out. And we don't want to leave this residue behind. Anytime I'm using a contact cleaner like this inside of a relay, I'm going to want to come back and flush this with alcohol really, really well. That's helped quite a bit, but they're by no means perfect. I'm going to try some more aggressive cleaning. This is just Brasso on a cotton swab, and it's acting basically like a really fine sandpaper. So I'm just taking a little layer off these relay contacts. And this, burnishing or polishing contacts is not super advisable because you can remove some of the coating on it and expose it to even worse oxidation if you go too deep. So I'm not usually a big fan of doing this unless I absolutely cannot find a replacement for a relay. If I can find a brand new relay, I'm just going to put in a brand new part. Flush this with some alcohol. This side of the contact looks actually quite good. I'm just going to clean it up the best I can, and we'll reassemble and retest. We can do a quick check by manually actuating the contacts here, and that's already looking much better. but I always like to do a real world test, so let's hook up the bench supply and feed this relay 24 volts. So you can see it's much better, but it's never going to be as good as a brand new relay. It is technically possible to recover the function of an original relay by cleaning, but we don't know how long that fix is going to last, so my preference is always to replace with brand new parts when available. So far, we've just been talking about electromechanical speaker protect relays, but relays are all over the place in vintage audio electronics. They come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. This, for example, is a reed relay, and these are really common in muting circuits in preamps and tuners. We have soft start circuits. They're just all over the place. So if you are experiencing an issue that has a symptom very similar to a dirty control, but you've cleaned all the controls and you can't track it down, take a look at your unit on the inside and take a look at the schematic and see if there's any relays that you might have missed. I completed the rest of the rebuild of this board off camera. Turned out really nice. The scraper actually held up surprisingly well, much better than the 3D printed ones I was using. It does have a little bit of damage, but to be honest, at this price, and with how many of them came in this bag, I can afford to use a new scraper on every project if I wanted to. If you'd like to pick up some of these scrapers for yourself, or you saw any other products during this video that caught your interest, head down to the description. I'll have some affiliate links available there. Now, what about these caps? I tested all of these caps with the Peak ESR 70, and they all tested good. The only ones that were marginal were these two 3.3 microfarad caps, which just had a little bit of elevated ESR, which is normal for a value this low. So these caps were all technically good. Now, I'm not telling you by any means to not do a recap on your unit. I'm just saying if you're going through the effort of replacing all of the electrolytic capacitors, you owe it to yourself to address some of these other issues as well. These three items just scratch the surface. We haven't even talked about stress solder joints, Zener diodes, the list goes on and on. So let me know down in the comments what you think are the most overlooked problems in vintage audio repair, and I'll see you in the next video.